great to be here with this first session. We're talking about the sport and the growing good. Like, how do we, through athletics, grow the good in our society and grow the good in our institutions where we work? So we work here at the University of Wisconsin, which a university which is world leading in many ways. And you look at the rankings of world institutions and research and teaching in many ways. Wisconsin is right there at the top. In recent years, athletics has been right up toward the top as well. I wanted to talk about three things with this session, three things leading off that we can all engage in conversation, especially with Professor Dickey here today. One is a little bit of history on the University of Wisconsin athletics and how, in many years past, those who have lived here a long time, I've lived in Wisconsin about only 11 years, and Professor Dickey's been here a lot longer than that. So my perspective is rather short, but others who have been here a long time realize that Wisconsin athletics has not always been such a big thing. There's some interesting pictures that I think you've showed me over the years of football games from when, like in the 60s, 70s, 80s, all throughout with the stadium empty and people would come more for the band than for the team. But things have changed, and the same was true in some ways for basketball, where there went many years. There are times when wrestling and other sports have all had ups and downs. But this last period of like 20 years at Wisconsin has been like unprecedented in its kind of success in lots of ways. But not just for its success, but also for its impact on the state of Wisconsin, the people who live here, and what athletics means to them. We did one little kind of, it seems silly, but a study last year when part of it was we looked at all the obituaries in the state. And there were literally thousands of people in their obituaries which mentioned Wisconsin athletics in their life story. And it sounds like a silly, trivial thing, but when you think about what an obituary is, it's a very brief chance to say something that was important in one's life. And we went through those, and it was actually kind of moving and powerful to see that when you have 3 paragraphs to talk about someone's life, that literally thousands of people in the state, and this was just in the year 2016, mentioned the word Badgers or UW or sports. It could have been wrestling, football, basketball, whatever it was, they were mentioning as important. So clearly UW athletics has grown to a level now that it's not just success on and off the court or the mat, the field, but impact and importance throughout the state. It's very clear, very evident. A second thing I wanted to talk about was a very different type of institution. So if the topic of this brief session today is the impact of athletics on a university or on a society, is it just at a place like this where we've had Rose Bowl championships and Final Fours in basketball, or can it also be at other types of institutions? One that's a really interesting story, and actually Walter's sons both attended this school, is the University of Chicago, which is a Division III school. And it's famous for lots of things, mostly academics and lots of things. But like in the early 1900s, Chicago was actually a powerhouse in college sports. It was in one of the top schools in college football,
Big
right?
Ten.
In the Big Ten. Amos Alonzo Stagg, the famous coach, was there, one of the fathers of American football. But then the university president kind of cut the sport. Do you remember much of the story of why that occurred, Walter?
I think in 1937, I think they just won the national championship or the Big Ten. I think they decided it was out of control. A lot of paying players, a lot of corruption. I think it was thought of as inconsistent with the academic mission, and they basically dropped all sports.
Which is almost unfathomable today that you win a national title and you cut it. But in the whole course of that institution, that was a key juncture, not just for them, but kind of the conference and for others as they moved away from big time sport. But an interesting kind of story that some less people have followed in the last few years is that Chicago has started promoting sport again. University of Chicago has started devoting more resources to their sports program. They've started seeing the good in sport. And not in the same way that we do at the University of Wisconsin, but maybe in some other ways. So that's that's a topic we'll maybe talk about today. Can institutions that are not just aiming for national championships and bowl game victories, is there benefit in sport at those types of places? And I know a lot of us in this room have actually been at very different types of institutions. Tanner shared with me some really interesting background in an institution that he you attended. I know even like in different schools we've all been at, whether it's a Division I school in a different type of conference or a Division III school, they all have different stories about sport. Then the third story I'd like to share, and then we'll get into our actual conversation. I'll stop hogging the floor here, is this really, I find it a compelling book by a former NFL player named John Urschel. John Urschel was a football player at Penn State and then a football player for the Baltimore Ravens in the NFL. But at the same time, he is this brilliant guy. Like, he's a brilliant mathematician. He's currently working on or just completed his doctorate at MIT in mathematics. And he has this book called Mind and Matter, in which he talks about the intersection of, in his life, of math and football. I'm going to play a little audio clip from, it's 4 minutes, audio clip from his book that will help us fuel our conversation here.
I'm a mathematician, a PhD candidate at MIT. I'm also a former professional football player, a retired offensive lineman for the Baltimore Ravens. Many people see me as a walking contradiction. They think that the pursuit of excellence in football makes the pursuit of excellence in mathematics impossible. They think that a strong interest in one makes a strong interest in the other improbable. People tend to think in binaries, right and wrong, black and white, mind and body, math and football. I don't spend a lot of time wondering about the ways in which I'm an anomaly. My life is the only one I know. It's normal to me. We all have multiple and sometimes diverging identities. In different ways, math and football are both essential to me. I'm sometimes asked about the connection between math and football. People want to know what edge being good in the classroom gave me on the field. And I know what they want to hear, and I usually give it to them. I talk about basic physics, intelligence, and problem solving. But the truth is, football and math are disjoint in my experience. When the ball is snapped, I'm not thinking about vectors and forces. I'm not really thinking about much of anything. I'm simply moving. Math gives me a way of making sense of the world. It helps me see past the confusion of everyday life and glimpse the underlying structures of the universe. It reveals the properties of shapes and the prevalence of patterns. It describes the relationships between things. I'm drawn to the rigor and clarity of mathematics, and to the elegance and simplicity of solutions to even the most complex problems. I know no other feeling like the satisfaction of discovery. I still feel the same sense of wonder and curiosity when I try to prove a theorem that I felt when I did logic and math puzzles as a kid. Football put me in contact with something messier, something elemental and deep within me. It strengthened not only my body, but also my confidence and will. Football was a game, and I had a lot of fun playing it, but it was always also a test for me. I looked like a football player. I'm 6'3" with shoulders that span a doorway and massive hands and feet. But I never had as much raw athletic talent as a lot of the guys I played with and against. I relied on my intensity and competitiveness and desire. This memoir proceeds on alternating parallel tracks. One is the story of my life in mathematics. It begins when I was a toddler, the age that my mother started buying me puzzle books and workbooks and started playing games with me, encouraging my mathematical creativity and reasoning. If I'm truly an outlier, it is because of her, an African-American single mother who loved math but was discouraged from it, who wanted me to never feel that any door was closed to me. For me, math is the great intellectual pursuit, though it calls upon my spirit too. It is a story of moving between the ideal abstract world and the reality we live in, a story of private investigation and also collaboration, both with mentors such as Vadim Koloshin, who first introduced me to mathematical research, and Ludmila Zakatanov, my collaborator and close friend, and with figures from the past, Leonard Euler, Henri Poincaré, John von Neumann, and others, whose work my own has built on. It explores not only my experience of encountering and learning mathematical concepts, from infinity to graph theory to the uncertainty principle, but also learning how to think. The other story is of my life in football, from the time I saw a picture of my father in pads. It is the story of how I strengthened my body and my will, how I learned to fail and learned from failing. It focuses on my experiences on the field, but it is also the story of how I learned to make friends and find my place in the social world. My football career began a decade or so after I saw that picture, at Canisius High School in Buffalo, New York, and continued at Penn State during years when the team's very existence was threatened by scandal. Finally, I made my way to the Baltimore Ravens in the NFL, where I learned to navigate a different kind of landscape and face the final difficult test, determining when to walk away. Those two stories, as different as they are, converge in me.
So it's a fascinating life and story. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit, but I want to start, Walter, with the first thing I brought up. So it brought up three things: the UW history and where we are now, the importance of athletics here, the University of Chicago story, and then this one individual story, John Urschel's story. Could you've been here, can you talk, your story is really interesting, Walter, and you don't have to go into great depth, but you came here right out of high school, out of New York to Wisconsin, and then have seen athletics and been involved in athletics from a variety of angles. Can you maybe give a brief but kind of a vantage point of where you've seen it come and go and the role it's played and the way it's viewed at the university and in the state of Wisconsin over that time?
Sure. I came to the university in '64, and we had just come off the '63 Rose Bowl. We lost to USC in a fantastic, dramatic game. But I would say football in particular sort of was headed for the abyss at that moment, and it stayed there really until Barry Alvarez resurrected it in 1990-91. Dave McLean, after whom the McLean Center is named, brought it to 7-8 wins, a bowl game occasionally. John Jardine did a similar thing, but I would say for the most part, those were really lost years, and they were lost years for the fans, for sure. Men's basketball, the other major sport, also had enormous limitations during that time. John Erickson actually was the coach when I first came, and I had friends on the team. They did okay, meaning went to the NIT. The NCAA tournament was not so big at that time, but eventually it became big, but we rarely, if ever, participated in it. And again, it wasn't until the late 90s when it started to really sort of resurrect itself. I see our wrestling friends are here. Actually, wrestling had moments of real brightness during that time. There were some really good teams and some really good wrestlers, national champions. One of the guys who's now gone, Breck Johnson, was a guy I played rugby with who had been the national champion at 188 pounds, or I don't know what the weight was at that time. I think it was close to being a heavyweight, not quite. Anyway, there are a lot of good wrestlers, so there were moments of brightness there. And track and field was also a place of brightness. We had really good cross country, really good track and field, Big Ten champions consistently, national champions, world record holders. Pat Matzdorf in the high jump, for example. We had sprinters, we had long distance runners who went to the Olympics, but those are relatively, obviously, minor sports. So it really was not a inspiring sort of set of programs during most of that time. But then Barry Alvarez obviously resurrected the football program, and others resurrected basketball and some of our other teams. I was going to say, though, in saying that, one of the things it's easy to leave out or forget is that fact that we did not achieve the kind of success we'd have liked doesn't mean that the kids who participated in those sports didn't enjoy the benefits of participation. Maybe that sort of gets into some of your second and third points. Because I think if it's not primarily about the young people who are participating, then frankly, we got a problem. I realize there are ancillary benefits, but their growth and development is really the primary reason for doing it. That's why the University of Chicago, I think, is sort of resurrecting their athletic programs. And when I say their growth and development, maybe I just sort of skip ahead a little bit to the third and make a quick point here and then shut up for a while. So when I was teaching, I ran a whole set of programs that really were centered on what is called experiential education. So I had law students working in the prisons, Innocence Project, DA's offices, police departments, clerks for a judge. And my view was that, first of all, to know whether you've learned something, you've got to be able to do it. You've got to execute it. And that in order to know whether you're executed, you've got to be in situations that call upon you, that demand of you, putting it all together, sort of in the sense that experience does. And so I used to think a lot about, so what are the qualities that we think we're trying to develop here? And again, I think the parallels to athletics are very close. You know, one of them obviously is resilience, right? I used to tell the students, you walk into the SEG building at Waupun, you're going to interview an inmate who's in leg irons and cuffs. That's a pretty daunting sort of experience. You learn how to do that, you're going to be able to interview anybody anywhere. And you're going to have failures. You're going to not get the information. You're not going to be able to help the person in the way that you'd like. And you got to sort of come back from that. You got to bounce back because that's what life requires. So resilience, obviously, one of them. Another one, I used to say I want my students leaving my classrooms or my programs poised to learn, ready to go on with life. That education is when I'm not there to tell them what to do. And so they'd have to communicate, right? That most of the things in life today require teamwork of some kind, and therefore trying to get the students to work in sync with others was really important, because unless you're able to work in sync with others, you're really not going to be able to sort of elevate yourself in the things that you're doing in the way that you really need to. Thirdly is the whole question of communication. You got to communicate obviously with that guy in SEG, but you got to communicate with lawyers, with juries, with the people that you're trying to convince of something, you're trying to elicit information. There are all kinds of things that you're going to try to do that I would say the best teacher is experience, then with reflection, guidance, and et cetera. Now, so if you look at athletics, I would say it develops all of those qualities. It's got this educational component to it, more than component to it. Education is sort of at the center of it. That's why I've been suggesting that we actually ought to be given credit for our athletic programs in the classrooms, because these qualities that I would say, and I think most educators would agree are important, are ones that we're developing on the playing fields, on the wrestling mat, on the basketball court, and we ought to be recognizing that. The point the fellow from Penn State made about analytical ability, I wonder now if he obviously knows his math, so he knows angles and he knows, right? And so my guess is he actually had a conception of the football team, right, or the football playing field, right, the offense and the defense, and he was obviously an offensive player, in which knowing who was where and what was required of everybody was vitally important. So he's got an analytical ability, an application of the stuff that he's been doing in the classroom that I guess has got all kinds of direct application. He may have been doing it at a very instinctive sort of level, but that doesn't mean those things weren't operating as he blocked the guy he was trying to block, or went to the second level and blocked the second guy, or whatever it was he was being called upon to do.
So you talked about the benefit of participating in sport, which really gets at the Chicago example. Like, you could justify them. You mentioned to me that they play in this conference where they're having to spend resources flying out. A couple of Walter's sons played college sports at University of Chicago, so he experienced it firsthand. They're flying to Johns Hopkins and Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, and all these other places. They're spending resources, and the justification can be it's good for the kids who are participating. But how can we justify, I can see that justification, how can we justify at a university like this spending millions and millions of dollars when you can do the Chicago model? Like, why is the Chicago model not the model as opposed to what we're doing at the University of Wisconsin?
So, I mentioned the value to the kids who are participating. We shouldn't sell short the value to the people who are watching. Right? We have other young people who are being influenced by the resiliency, the comeback part of things, the excellence part of things. And don't think for a minute that they're not learning something and seeing an example that has got value to them. But then I think there are other things. You mentioned the obituaries, right? So the state of Wisconsin has a certain identity, and we value that, and I think we should value that. The identification with the athletic programs is a source of that identity. That sort of brings people together in ways that we need more of, not less of, right? And if it's rallying around the Badgers or whatever the case may be, rallying around something and feeling that you're a part of something bigger than yourself, whether it's the team or it's the state or it's the world of Badger fans. There's an awful lot of value in that. I would say one other thing about it. So I used to occasionally sort of think to myself, well, geez, I wonder what I would have become if I hadn't become what I became. And one of the things I used to think to myself was, I really would have liked to have been a comedian, right? So now, why would I like to be a comedian? And the answer was, because if you can make people laugh, you've done something good for them. Right? I mean, you've really done something good for them, because there's not enough laughter in the world, there's not enough enjoyment in the world. And if one of the things that our football team on Saturday and our basketball team and our wrestling team do is bring joy to people, I mean, there's a heck of a lot to be said for that, right? There's a heck of a lot to be said for that. And by the way, on the money part, it's not like we're taking the taxpayers' money. We're earning our keep here. Yeah. We're self-sufficient and more than self-sufficient. Yeah. We're contributing to the campus in big numbers. Yeah. So it's not like we're a drain on resources that otherwise would be going to something else that people might argue is more beneficial.
It's a point of entree for a lot of people that a university like Madison, to a lot of people in Wisconsin, may be like a place that is not looked upon fondly for a lot of reasons, that they are not familiar with it. If you live in some other part of the state, they don't know the university or have a lot of experience with it. But he had this one comment in here. The John Urschel, he said that through football, it's a place where lives converge. Like different types of lives converge through sport. Universities are kind of places where different lives converge, and it seems like that thing you said about bringing enjoyment, part of it is that people enjoy football or wrestling or basketball. Another part is that they're coming together with people that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise. You have this kind of point of mutual interest. I saw yesterday our coaches released released a schedule, and it was kind of cool to follow, even like on Twitter, to see all these people from around the state of Wisconsin and other saying how excited they were to be going to University of Wisconsin wrestling matches. And I'm imagining who these people are, and maybe a lot of them are not people who are super knowledgeable about other parts of a campus, but they love wrestling, and it's something that will bring them to the university. It's something that brings them together. And you could say that about a lot of sport. So I think that's a big point as well. I would like to open it up a little bit about, just to finish up our conversation here. We have some coaches here. We have some former athletes who maybe you could talk about. I don't want to put you on the spot, but maybe Q, I might actually come to you first, because I will put you on the spot. So Q, you have just a great story, a young man who came here from Milwaukee, again, in the state. And I wonder if you could just share, just nothing profound needed, but what the University of Wisconsin was in your mind before you came here, and then how was it being a member of a basketball team? How did that shape your, how you experienced the university, and maybe how you've lived after graduating here?
Well, living in Milwaukee, of course, I really didn't know anything about the University of Wisconsin. I was in an academic program where we would come here every summer and spend summers to get ready for college and everything. And of course, we had to be admitted first, but UW sports, like basketball, football, we didn't know pretty much anything about it, because Marquette was right in town, and Marquette would shove down our throat a little bit. So when I first got here, I didn't see the importance until like my first.
How did you
Saturday.
choose to come here? Why did you come here then?
I came here because I had a football and basketball scholarship to a HBCU, but the school, like the academics, wasn't up to par as UW, so I just thought I was going to retire and just like go to school.
Yeah.
So when I got here the first game day, I was like, man, this is Sea of Red walking down the street. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't even know it was a game. So after you see that, you start getting that urge to be a part of it. And then when my tryout came along, and then I got on the team, and I started saying like, okay, I made the right choice of coming here, and then I realized the magnitude of being on a sports team at a prestigious university like this. So being a part of the team was one thing that really changed my life because, you know, with my coach, he was he wanted to make sure you do everything right the first time rather than, you know, keep having to do everything over and over. And that really brought resilience and mental toughness to me because, you know, during this academic journey, my master's and my PhD, I don't think I would have done it if I hadn't played basketball because I don't think I would have been mentally strong enough and been able to take the workload. And I learned time management just being in athletics and learning how to network and everything in different ways. So it really changed my life because, I mean, sports really teaches the intangibles that you might not get in other areas of your life. So it really helped me.
Yeah. It's probably a story. Your story is unique in where you came from and what you did, but a lot of us probably share some iteration of that story of like how sport created opportunity in our lives and has shaped how we've experienced this place. Maybe I'll just close with one, if it's okay, question for, we got a couple of our wrestling coaches here. Coach, could you talk about how the role of a coach is an institutional leader at a university, and how do you view your role as a coach at a university in terms of not only like developing kind of technical skill or life habits in a young man, but also doing so while they're being a part of a university? What does that mean? How is it different being at the university as opposed to just maybe wrestling for a regional training program, that kind of thing?
Right. Well, we tell these guys, no matter what they're doing, whether they're downtown at night, they're always representing the university. And so they have a responsibility to carry every day of their lives in the classroom, you know, in the wrestling room, and in society. You're representing the university. You're looked upon as a University of Wisconsin athlete. And so besides teaching them the skills that Q is talking about, which is everything we try to do as a coach. Your coach was great. He's that's what we want to do. But they also have to understand that they represent the university outside the wrestling room. And that's something we really try to hit home to, because in the grand scheme of things, when wrestling's over, how are you going to be productive in society? And we hope that the skills that we teach as coaches can make them, can turn around and make them productive in society.
Well, I think, thank you all for your insights. I think we all, every day we read like the ESPN ticker and you can see all there's scandal and there's problems and there's a lot of things. I hope one thing we can go ahead.
No, I was going to say on that count, you know, I was just with somebody yesterday who had noticed that once again in the Wall Street Journal wall of shame,
Oh, yeah.
we're upper right, which is where we want to be, right? Integrity.
So that is, for those who do not know, every year the Wall Street Journal publishes this graphic, and they have a Y, the Y-axis is kind of admirability, I believe, meaning like, has your institution largely done things the right way in terms of not broken the rules and that kind of thing? And then the X-axis is success, I believe, like on a competitive field. I believe I have those right. Yes. And so when you say we're in the upper right, it means it's both admirable and successful.
Yes. And I can't tell you how many people say to me, I'm really proud of how well our athletic teams do, and that we do things in an honorable way. And that's what the upper right meant to him. Do it the right way. Yeah. Do it with integrity.
Yeah. And so that's a point of pride to, was this an alum?
It goes to it was an alum.
Yeah.
Yes, this goes to the identity,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
As well as that is telling you, that means if I have expectations for how my university is going to behave, I have expectations for how I'm going to behave.
Which is what Coach was saying.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, if one of the central themes of this whole project is the growing good of sport, like how is, when we talk about that, we can talk about it at like the individual level of like this guy who developed himself as he became a mathematician and a high-level football player. We could talk about it as the growing the good of an institution as well, growing kind of the goodness of the lessons that are learned, what is taught there, and how people view it. So I think I hope as this little section, I hope the one thing we can come out is as we read these scandals, and there are problems like I think we also need to acknowledge there are a lot of problems in sport. There are people who do things the wrong way. There are people who cheat and people who are all out of whack. As we acknowledge those problems and address those problems, we also have to keep our eye on the good and how the good has grown through sport. And I think these were some great examples today. So thank you. Thank you all for joining.